The rain fell softly over the small coastal town of Ravello. The streets were quiet, covered in silver light from the old lamps. Waves crashed gently against the rocks below the cliffside houses, carrying memories no one could escape. In one tiny house near the sea lived a girl named Elena. Every morning, she opened the old wooden window and watched the horizon as if someone might return from it. But nobody ever did. Elena had learned early that life was cruel. Her mother died when she was only 8 years old, and her father, broken by grief, disappeared one winter night without saying goodbye. Since then, Elena lived alone with her grandmother in a fragile little house that smelled of salt water and old books. Despite everything, Elena had the kindest heart in the town. She worked at a small bookstore near the harbor. She loved stories because stories were the only place where broken people sometimes found happy endings. But Elena herself stopped believing in love long ago, until the day she met Luca. It was autumn when he first walked into the bookstore. Tall, quiet, dark brown hair dripping from the rain. He looked lost. "Do you have any books about the sea?" he asked softly. Elena looked up from the counter. For a moment, the world became silent. She didn't know why her heart suddenly beat faster. "There's an entire shelf," she answered nervously. Luca smiled, and somehow that smile felt warm enough to heal years of loneliness. After that day, he returned often. Sometimes he bought books. Sometimes he just sat near the window while Elena worked. And slowly, without realizing it, they became each other's favorite part of the day. One evening, after closing the shop, Luca asked her, "Do you ever feel like the sea understands sadness?" Elena looked at the waves. "Yes," she whispered, "because it never stops crying." Luca stared at her quietly. "You're lonely, too," he said. Nobody had ever understood her that quickly before. Tears nearly escaped her eyes, but she smiled instead. That night, they walked beside the ocean for hours, talking about dreams, pain, fear, life. For the first time in years, Elena laughed from her heart. And for the first time in years, she stopped feeling alone. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The town began noticing them together everywhere. At the harbor, at the bakery, walking in the rain under one umbrella. Luca made Elena feel alive again. He remembered small things about her. How she hated thunderstorms. How she secretly loved piano music. How she always touched her necklace when nervous. One snowy evening, Luca took her to the cliff overlooking the sea. The sky was full of stars. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Elena's heart trembled. "I think I've loved you since the first day I saw you." Her eyes filled with tears. Nobody had ever loved her before. Not truly. Not completely. And suddenly all the sadness she carried for years broke apart inside her. She cried into his arms while the cold wind surrounded them. "I love you too," she whispered. That night became the happiest moment of Elena's life. But happiness is sometimes frighteningly short. A few weeks later, Elena noticed Luca growing weaker. He coughed often. His hands trembled. His smile looked tired. "Are you okay?" she asked many times. And every time he answered, "I'm fine." But he wasn't. One afternoon, Elena arrived at the bookstore and found Luca waiting outside in the rain. His face looked pale. His eyes were red. And before she could speak, he handed her a folded paper. It was a hospital report. Elena read the words again and again. Her hands began shaking. Heart disease. Critical condition. Limited time. The world around her collapsed. No, she whispered. Luca lowered his head. I don't want you to know. Elena started crying immediately. How long? A year. Maybe less. She felt like the air disappeared from her lungs. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to live normally at least once before I died. Those words shattered her completely. From that day on, Elena tried to make every moment beautiful for him. They watched sunsets together, danced slowly in the empty bookstore after closing, wrote letters to each other, sat quietly beside the sea without speaking, because sometimes love becomes too deep for words. But Luca's condition worsened. He became weaker every week. Yet he still smiled for her, still held her hand, still told her she was beautiful even when she cried. One night, during a heavy storm, Luca collapsed near the harbor. Elena screamed for help as rain poured endlessly around them. At the hospital, doctors rushed him into surgery. Hours passed. Elena sat alone in the hallway, shaking with fear, praying, crying, begging God not to take him away. At sunrise, the doctor finally walked toward her slowly. And Elena understood the answer before he even spoke. I'm sorry. Her entire world stopped. The funeral happened 3 days later. The whole town came. Rain covered the cemetery as Elena stood frozen beside his grave. People hugged her, spoke softly, but she heard nothing, because the only voice she wanted to hear was gone forever. After everyone left, Elena stayed there alone until nightfall, holding the last letter Luca wrote for her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, his handwriting was uneven but gentle. My Elena, if you are reading this, it means I could not stay longer. I'm sorry. Loving you is the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. Before you, life felt dark. You made me feel alive. Promise me something. Please don't stop smiling because of me. And whenever you miss me, go to the sea. I'll be there in every wave. I love you. Forever. Luca. Elena broke down crying beside his grave. The kind of crying that comes from a soul completely destroyed. Months passed. Winter became spring. But Elena never truly healed. Every evening after work, she walked to the ocean and sat on the same cliff where Luca confessed his love. People often saw her there alone, watching the horizon, listening to the waves, waiting for someone who would never return. Yet strangely, she kept living, because love had changed her forever. And even though Luca was gone, his love remained inside her heart like a light that refused to die. Years later, Elena became the owner of the bookstore. She still kept Luca's favorite book near the window where he first sat. Sometimes customers asked why she smiled sadly whenever it rained. She always answered softly, because rain reminds me of someone I loved. One evening, an old man entered the shop and handed her a small package. It belonged to Luca, he said. Inside was a tiny silver ring and a note. I wanted to give this to you one day beside the sea. In another life, maybe we would have grown old together. Elena cried for hours that night, not because love ended, but because it was real. And real love never truly disappears. That same night, Elena walked to the cliff again. The ocean stretched endlessly under the moonlight. Cold wind touched her face gently, and for a brief moment, she felt him there beside her, not as pain, not as loss, but as love, the kind that stays forever. Elena closed her eyes and smiled through tears. I still love you, Luca. The waves crashed softly below, as if the sea itself answered back. And somewhere beyond the horizon, two hearts still belong to each other. Forever. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.